We may hear a lot about upstage lighting being an easy way to create a cinematic look, but this can often ignore the fact that there's no one-size-fits-all lighting technique. Lighting should primarily try to complement the mood and feelings presented by the scene or story. For example, hard light and shadowy figures might not suit a carefree, happy narrative, but it may suit a darker one. However the image is lit needs to work with the film as a whole to form the intended feeling and a cohesive narrative. And this is what we might class as cinematic, not just a lighting pattern by itself. So how do we use different lighting patterns appropriately to accentuate the feelings contained in a story or scene? Upstage lighting, also referred to as short lighting, refers to lighting the side of the subject's face furthest from the camera. Broad lighting refers to lighting the side of the subject's face closest to the camera. On the broad side, we can see the face has been widened, making it appear flatter and smoothing out the skin. On the short side, the face looks slimmer, making it appear more three-dimensional, but it also more obviously shows up bumps and wrinkles on the skin. This is true at whatever angle we place our light within each side, even as more of a backlight. You can see why upstage lighting is a popular technique for a dramatic look, but on both You may have noticed some of this short sequence contained, you guessed it, broad lighting. This was especially prevalent at the table, where, after being presented a key, some sort of dark realization was had by one of our characters. But why did we use broad lighting, and not something more obviously cinematic and moody, like short lighting or upstage? The broad lighting in the first part of the sequence was both a consequence of lighting motivation, but also a great way to carry the general mood of the scene. Our character is lit by the window to his right, so a cut to his face straight on would also need to be lit by this window. When he turns to follow the sound of the door being entered, he ends up being lit by the window on his broad side, looking into the darkness. A great way to foreshadow what his guest might be bringing to him. The broad lighting at the table was more deliberately chosen. We wanted something low-key, with a good amount of shadow to convey the unsettling mood backed up by the music. But at the same time, we needed to show a realistic situation of two characters having a friendly drink. So we decided to place a few table lamps throughout the location and simply light our characters with the main lamp on the table they sit at. This creates a broad lighting pattern on both characters, which plays on that feeling of a comfortable home environment. Their faces being more exposed to the light source, their skin appearing smoother. We've created that homely feeling by utilising broad light. And by keeping our shadows relatively dark, we balance this comfortable feeling with the uncomfortable one presented through the overall tone of the sequence. And we can really drive the main point of the scene, that final, subtle look of awareness in the character. If we had lit this using short lighting, we might not have been able to capture these feelings quite as well. Although short lighting picks up more texture on the skin, helping to highlight micro-expressions, as well as creating an overall darker look, it doesn't capture that feeling of vulnerability that lighting the broadside has given us. This feeling helps to better convey the emotions of our character, who has tentatively invited someone into his home, let his guard down, and ended up with a potentially unwanted gift. Lighting Upstage might rid the scene of this subtle coherence tying it together. We've not made our scene look cinematic with a particular lighting style. We've made it feel cinematic by learning about and understanding different lighting patterns, and using that knowledge to create a cohesion between lighting and story. These scenes were lit quite simply. In the front room, we started with just the ambient window light. We set up a 4x4 floppy negative fill flag to cut down on any light that may have been coming from the other side of the house. We then set up a Forza 60C reflector dish attached, aimed at the ceiling above the window, set to the same colour temperature as the outside ambient. This helped to subtly extend the window light around and below the window, boosting the overall exposure and creating some more separation between our subject and background. Another Forza 60C with the Bowens mount attachment was placed in a 47-inch octabox, grid attached. Also set to the same colour temperature, this helped to extend the light from the window, giving some exposure to our subject's face. In the close-up, we'd actually lost all daylight from outside. So we placed one of our Forza 60C's reflector dish attached and bounced it into the wall behind the camera and in front of our subject, set to the same colour temperature as our previous light sources. This gave us a flat, low-level fill light, replicating the way both natural and artificial light had been bouncing around the room earlier. Our second Forza 60C and gridded octabox were used once again, this time to roughly replicate the light we would have been getting from the window previously, set to the same colour temperature. In the second scene, we placed a Pavobulb 10C in the lampshade on the table, setting its colour temperature to a warm 3200 Kelvin. This provided both a practical light for the scene and key light for our characters. Another Pavobulb 10C was placed in a lampshade in the back room, set to the same colour temperature. In this back room, we turned on a third light, extending the ambient from the lamp. This was a Mixpanel 150, set to 3200 Kelvin, and bounced from the ceiling. A fourth light was used, just to bring up the shadows slightly in the foreground. This was a Forza 60C, reflector dish attached, bounced from a nearby wall. This simply aided in recreating the effect of our final light, another lampshade behind our second character. This final lampshade contained another Pavobulb 10C at 3200 Kelvin once again. With all lights set to this colour temperature across the scene, we maintain that realistic, comfortable, homely feeling, with a good amount of shadow to remind us of the darker tones presented throughout the scene. Remember that there's no single style or technique of lighting that can work for everything. How a scene is lit is often best determined by a balance of story, practicality, and feeling.